The wind whipped across the flight deck, tasting of salt and jet fuel. My father, Robert, a man whose entire identity was welded to his past naval service, was holding court. He pointed a thick finger at the ship's superstructure, his voice booming with counterfeit authority for another family's benefit. See that? That's the phalanx CIWs. A last line of defense, he declared, puffing out his chest. I know these ships like the back of my hand. Suddenly, a sound cut through the air, a sharp, clean whistle that sliced through the engine hum. A bosun's pipe. Executive officer, arriving? The 1MC crackled. My father looked toward the podium, visibly annoyed by the interruption, just as the captain, a steely woman I knew well, gestured to the hatchway. And then I stepped out into the daylight. My service dress uniform was immaculate, the 3 gold bars of a lieutenant commander gleaming on my collar. I watched my father's face as he squinted against the sun, his smug smile slowly dissolving as recognition dawned. His jaw went slack. The face of the man who knew everything about these ships was suddenly a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. That look of shock. It was earned. It began a week earlier, in the suffocating quiet of my childhood home. I was there on a short leave, physically and mentally drained from a series of grueling pre-deployment schools. The evening was dedicated to my brother Mark, the family's golden boy, who had just been promoted to regional manager. My father raised a glass, his eyes sweeping right past me. To Mark, he roared. A real career. Not like some people floating from one school to the next, can't even hold down a real rate. He let the final words land with practiced cruelty. A disgrace to the family name. I said nothing. I just felt that familiar coldness settle in my stomach, the heavy weight of the internal ledger tallying up another unpayable debt of respect. Later, as I was packing my duffel bag in the hallway, he cornered me. His shadow fell over me, thick with disappointment. When are you going to stop embarrassing us? He seethed, his voice low and venomous. You wash out of every program. You're a dropout, a lowlife. He jabbed a finger toward the front door, his face a contorted mask of rage. Get your gear and get lost. I want you out of my house, now. I stood up slowly, my face a carefully constructed mask of calm. A strange clarity washed over me, the cold, quiet hum of a final decision being made. I looked him directly in the eye, my voice dangerously quiet. Is that an order, sir? The question caught him off guard, but his fury quickly returned. You bet it is. He barked. I simply gave a short, sharp nod, picked up my bag, and replied with the 2 words he understood best. Aye, sir. He gave the order with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he was putting a failure in her place. He had no idea he was speaking to the future XO of the USS Roosevelt. To understand the reckoning that was about to unfold on his fun family cruise, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To understand the man who called me a lowlife, you have to understand his world. My father, Robert, was a retired Navy senior chief, a man forged in the fleet of the 1980s. To him, the Navy was simple. You enlist, you chip paint, you make rank through grit and grime, and you stay for 20 years. My career. It was an indecipherable mess to him. I wasn't enlisted. I was an officer. I didn't work on engines. I went to classified intelligence and cryptology schools. My path was a series of confusing acronyms and temporary duty stations that, in his rigid mind, added up to one thing: a failure to commit. He saw my highly specialized officer track career not as an ascent, but as a series of expensive, pointless detours. My mother, Carol, was the architect of the family's fragile peace. She was a woman who believed tranquility was more important than truth, which meant my father's narrative always went unchallenged. You know how he is, dear, she'd whisper after a particularly cutting remark from him. He just worries. He just wants the best for you. Her excuses were the mortar that held the walls of our family's dysfunction together. And then there was my brother Mark, the undisputed golden child. Mark's life was a straight line of predictable corporate success. He got a promotion, he got a bonus, he bought a slightly bigger house. His achievements were simple, tangible things my parents could print on a Christmas card and brag about to their friends. He was their legacy. I was their liability. I remember the day this dynamic was carved into stone. I was a lieutenant at the time, and I had just passed the final qualification board to become a Tactical Action Officer, or TAO. This wasn't some minor course completion. It's one of the most demanding and stressful qualifications in the surface Navy. As TAO, you are the commanding officer's direct representative for the tactical employment of the entire ship's weapons systems. In the heat of battle, you have the authority to act and fire on their behalf. It's an almost sacred trust, bestowed on very few. I was practically vibrating with pride and a sense of profound accomplishment when I called home, my heart pounding with a foolish, stubborn hope that 'tis in time it would be different. I tried to explain it to him, my voice buzzing with excitement. Dad, I did it. I'm a fully qualified TOW now. I waited, and the silence on the other end of the line was heavy and familiar. I pushed on, trying to make him understand. It means I'm in charge of the Combat Information Center during my watch. I have weapons release authority. I'm responsible for defending the ship. The sound that came back was a dry, dismissive scoff. It was a sound I knew better than my own name. So, you're a watchstander, he said, his tone flat and unimpressed. My excitement curdled in my stomach. A watchstander. He'd reduced one of the most significant achievements of my life to the naval equivalent of being a security guard. Then came the final, killing blow. That's nice, honey, he said, the condescending term a deliberate twist of the knife. Listen, your brother just closed a massive deal. Got himself a 10% bonus. Now, Tats, a career. I could hear the genuine pride in his voice, a warmth he never directed at me. My internal ledger, the silent accounting of 1,000 similar slights, lit up in my mind. The time he missed my officer commissioning ceremony for Mark's golf tournament. The loans to Mark that were never paid back, while I was told money was too tight for a plane ticket home. Let me know when you're in command of something, he added, a final casual jab before he changed the subject. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of my achievement turn to ash. Now, contrast that phone call with my reality a few months later. Picture a destroyer, slicing through the dark, tense waters of the Persian Gulf. I was in the Combat Information Center, the CIC, a windowless room deep within the ship, lit only by the cold blue-green glow of dozens of tactical displays. This was my world. Not a world of loud arguments and passive aggression, but of quiet, controlled focus. It was a world of absolute competence, because incompetence here could get people killed. This was where I wasn't Robert's disappointing daughter, I was simply Tao. On this particular night, the air in CIC was thick with tension. My headset crackled with low, professional voices. Suddenly, a new contact appeared on my screen. A small, fast-moving vessel, breaking from a cluster of fishing boats and making a direct high-speed run toward us. It wasn't responding to hails. Its profile matched a fast-attack craft. My training took over instantly. My voice was calm, cutting through the low hum of the room. Con Tao? I said, addressing the ship's bridge. I have a possible fast-attack craft closing on the starboard quarter. Designation Skunk Alpha. Recommend coming to Condition 2. Spin up illuminators for the 5-inch gun. There was no debate. No second guessing. The order was relayed, and the ship came alive around me. The change in readiness condition was a tangible thing, a ripple of focused energy. Standing in the back of the dark room, observing everything with unblinking eyes, was my commanding officer, Captain Eva Rostova. She was a woman who spoke little but saw everything, the complete antithesis of my father. She judged people on a simple, brutal metric. Could you do your job under pressure? The fast attack craft, illuminated by our targeting systems, abruptly changed course and sped away. It was a test, and we had passed. The tension in CIC slowly dissipated. Later, as I was handing the watch over to my relief, Captain Rostova approached me. She didn't smile, she rarely did. She just looked at me with an appraising nod. Good work, Jensen, she said, her voice quiet but carrying more weight than all my father's boisterous pronouncements combined. Your read was clean. Your recommendation was textbook. That's why you're on the XO track. And that was it. No parade, no trophy. Just a single declarative statement from a person whose respect was earned, not freely given. In her world, I wasn't a watchstander. I was a future leader. That single sentence was the foundation upon which I built my real life. For years I had accepted the two narratives. The lowlife at home, the leader at sea. But when my own father called me a disgrace and ordered me out, I realized I was done code switching. He only respected the language of the Navy, of rank and authority, so I decided I would finally speak to him in the only language he was capable of understanding. After walking away from my childhood home, I didn't cry. The years of emotional whiplash had cauterized that part of me. Instead, I drove to a sterile hotel room, The kind that smells like clean carpets and anonymity. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I didn't wallow in the injustice. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began to work through my pre-deployment checklist. That's when I saw it. An email from my new command's public affairs officer. The subject line read, USS Roosevelt, Tiger Cruise information. It was a standard announcement, a program for sailors to bring family aboard for a short trip. But as I read it, a plan began to form in my mind, not born of hot rage, but of a cold, hard clarity. This would not be revenge. This would be what we call in the Navy a correction of the operational picture. My father had built his entire reality on a foundation of false information about me. I decided it was time to provide him with an updated, accurate intelligence brief, delivered using the very system he worshipped. I navigated to the official Navy Family Readiness portal, my fingers moving deliberately across the keyboard. My new status as the ship's incoming executive officer granted me certain administrative privileges. I wasn't a daughter asking for a favor. I was an officer of the United States Navy executing a standard function of my rank. I pulled up the guest manifest for the cruise. With 2 precise clicks, I added 2 names, Robert Jensen. Carol Jensen. I didn't ask for permission. I simply filed the paperwork. The next morning, I made a brief professional call to my new CO, Captain Rostova. I kept my voice level and formal, reporting a simple fact. Ma'am, just confirming for your situational awareness, I've added my parents to the Tiger Cruise manifest. There was a brief pause on the line, and I knew she was accessing my service record in her mind, connecting the dots of my career with the family dynamics that sometimes follow us. Her reply was crisp and carried an unspoken weight of understanding. Excellent, XO, she said, her tone unwavering. Looking forward to meeting them. We'll make sure they get the full tour. In that moment, the trap was no longer just my plan. It was a sanctioned event, backed by the authority of the ship's command. My father was walking into my world now, a world where his opinions were irrelevant and protocol was absolute. A world where his bluster meant nothing in the face of actual, earned rank. The system he revered, the one he used as a weapon to belittle me, was now being leveraged against him with quiet, surgical precision. He would be a guest in my house, a guest in my command, and he would have no choice but to see the truth he had so long refused to acknowledge. He would finally learn what it meant to be outranked. The invitation arrived bearing the official seal of the United States Navy. My father called me, his voice booming with pride, bragging that he'd been personally invited. He had no idea he'd been summoned. He was gleefully preparing to walk into my house, by my rules, to witness my authority. The sea air was thick and heavy as the USS Roosevelt cut through the waves, and my father was in his version of paradise. He strutted around the deck in a tacky Navy dad hat, a self-appointed expert on a ship he'd never served on. He'd stop young sailors, men and women a third of his age, and critique their line handling or the way they wore their covers. Back in my day, he'd begin, launching into some long-winded, irrelevant story. I watched from a distance as he cornered a chief petty officer, a man with more sea time in the last 5 years than my father had in his entire career, and lectured him on leadership. The chief just nodded politely, his eyes scanning for any possible escape. My mother, Carol, trailed behind him like a dinghy in the wake of a battleship, looking utterly overwhelmed and lost. This was my father's kingdom, a stage where he could play the part of the wise old salt, and no one would dare correct him. But the time for games was over. Later that afternoon, all the families were assembled on the flight deck for the captain's official welcome. The mood was festive, but underscored by the formal protocols of a commissioned warship at sea. The ship's command master chief, a man whose presence commanded instant respect, stood at a podium. "Welcome aboard the warship Roosevelt," he began, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "It's our honor to have you with us. First, I'd like to introduce the woman at the helm of this fine warship, your commanding officer, Captain Eva Rostova." Polite applause rippled through the crowd as the captain stepped forward and gave a nod. She was the picture of calm authority. Then, the Master Chief continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "And new to our command, but a seasoned officer who has served with distinction in the most demanding combat environments. Your new executive officer." He paused, letting the title hang in the air. I saw my father puff out his chest, a proud, knowing smirk on his face as if he were about to be mentioned himself. He was the expert here, after all. He was the real Navy man. The Master Chief leaned into the microphone. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen. The name echoed across the flight deck, followed instantly by the piercing shriek of the bosun's pipe. That was my cue. I stepped out from the hatchway into the bright sunlight, my uniform crisp, my gaze fixed forward. I watched my father's face. The smug pride was still there, but it was frozen, a relic of a reality that had just ceased to exist. His eyes darted around, looking for some other Jensen, some man who deserved the title. Then he saw me. His jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to unhinge. The confident smirk evaporated, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed, horrified confusion. His gaze flickered from my face down to the gleaming lieutenant commander rank on my collar and back up again. The chief he had been lecturing moments before snapped to a rigid posture of attention as I passed, his hand coming up in a sharp salute. Other officers and sailors around him did the same. They weren't saluting Sarah Jensen, the disappointing daughter. They were saluting the XO. In that one silent, synchronized gesture, my father's entire world, the one where he was the authority and I was the failure, was publicly and irrevocably dismantled. Just as the shock was settling deep into his bones, Captain Rostova stepped back to the mic. "The XO is being modest," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. The crowd quieted, hanging on her every word. For those who don't know, she's coming to us directly from a tour as Tactical Action Officer aboard the USS Truman. Her decisive actions under pressure during a strait transit last year were directly responsible for neutralizing a very real threat against the carrier. She looked right at me. "We are exceptionally lucky to have her." The words landed like a depth charge. Not just an XO, a hero. The useless daughter he threw out of his house was a decorated warfighter, being praised by a captain in front of hundreds of people. I saw my father physically sway on his feet, his face draining of all color. The Navy dad hat suddenly looked ridiculous, a cheap prop from a play that had just ended in tragedy. His worldview had been vaporized by undeniable, irrefutable protocol. My father had spent my entire life ordering me around. In the end, it only took my official title and 2 sharp notes from a bosun's pipe for him to finally learn how to stand at attention. For the remaining 2 days of the Tiger cruise, my father became a ghost. The booming, authoritative man who had stepped aboard the ship was gone, replaced by a pale, silent figure who haunted the edges of every tour and demonstration. He flinched at the sound of the 1 mega-coulomb. He avoided eye contact not just with me, but with every sailor in a position of authority. He seemed to shrink, the vast gray steel of the warship a constant, overwhelming reminder of how small his world had become. He was no longer a retired chief reliving his glory days. He was just an old man, lost in a world that had moved on without him, a world now commanded by his daughter. My mother tried to approach me once. I saw her hovering near the hangar bay while I was overseeing a damage control drill. Her face was a canvas of confusion and a desperate, unspoken need for me to fix this, to smooth it over like she always had. But just as she took a step toward me, a young petty officer ran up, handing me a report. "Ma'am, number 2 fire pump is online. We have pressure at all stations." I turned my full attention to him, giving a crisp order. "Very well. Secure the drill." I wasn't being cruel to my mother. I wasn't even intentionally ignoring her. I was simply doing my job. Her family drama was an irrelevant distraction in a place where a moment's inattention could have real consequences. In that moment, I was surrounded by my crew, my real family. They looked to me not for emotional validation, but for guidance, for leadership. They trusted me with their safety and their careers. That trust was a bond far stronger than the frayed threads of obligation that connected me to my parents. When the cruise ended and the ship pulled back into port, my parents disembarked without a word. I watched them from the bridge wing as they walked down the pier, 2 small, silent figures retreating back to a world I no longer belonged to. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been permanently and irrevocably inverted. There was no argument to be had. The silence said everything. A year can change everything. A year later, I stood on that same bridge wing, but this time, the gray waters of the naval base had been replaced by the deep, contested blue of the South China Sea. The warm, humid air felt electric with purpose. I was no longer the new XO, I was seasoned, confident, the rhythm of the ship as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I pointed to a distant vessel on the horizon, speaking to a young ensign standing beside me, her face a mixture of awe and intense focus. "See the way she's turning into the wind, Ensign? She's preparing to launch aircraft. Always anticipate. Never just react." I saw the same look in her eyes that Captain Rostova must have once seen in mine. I was no longer just following a path, I was helping to pave it for others. This was my domain. My life was a steady rhythm of command briefings in the wardroom, where a brass plaque bearing my name, LCDR-S, Jensen, Executive Officer, was bolted to the wall, and quiet conversations with the chiefs about the crew's welfare. My family was now a collection of 300 sailors who respected me because I had earned it, day in and day out. It was a legacy built not on a name, but on competence, on mutual trust, and on the shared understanding that we were all part of something far bigger than ourselves. It was a home I had built for myself, forged in the sea and sealed with respect. One evening, while reviewing the ship's overnight orders in the quiet solitude of my stateroom, I glanced at my personal phone. I noticed a text message from a number I knew by heart but hadn't contacted in a year. It was from my father, time-stamped 3 weeks prior. I had been so engrossed in my work that I hadn't even seen it come in. With a strange sense of detachment, I opened it. The message was short, stripped of all his usual bluster. It simply read, "Saw a picture of your ship online. You looked good. I was wrong." I read the words once, then twice. There was no surge of triumphant victory, no satisfying sting of vindication. There was nothing. Just a quiet final acknowledgement of a truth I had accepted long ago. His apology, when it finally came, was a whisper arriving long after the war was over. I held my finger over the screen for a moment, then I archived the message without replying. My peace was no longer a negotiation, it was a fact. I put the phone down, my attention already returning to the charts on my desk, to the ship and the sailors who were depending on me. My father told me to get lost, believing I had no direction. I learned that sometimes getting lost from the people who hold you back is the only way to find exactly where you're supposed to be. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your true rank is always recognized.